Hey, special educators, I'm Jennifer from Positively Learning. Welcome to the Special Educators Resource Room. If you're like me, you're always looking for ways to save time and streamline your work. That's why this podcast was created, to give you the systems and solutions you need to get your time back. Tune in for tips, tricks, and tools that will help you manage your workload and make the most of your time. Whether you're brand new or experienced, all are welcome in the Special Educators Resource Room. Hey, special educators, it's Jennifer from Positively Learning. Thanks so much for stopping in. Today's episode is how to get started choosing the right task boxes for your students. Now, if you've been following me for a while, this topic is probably no surprise. I talk about task boxes all the time. I am mildly obsessed. Maybe it's more of a surprise that I haven't mentioned it until this episode. I realize that not everyone's thinking about task boxes as often as I am. In fact, I have heard a major pain point to getting started with task boxes, and that is, how do I choose the right tasks for my students? Because there's so many choices out there. And I totally understand. One major difference that I noticed when I switched over to a task box system was that my students were going through higher quantities of tasks. For example, in one setting, my students may go through 3 different tasks, 3 different task boxes. Contrast that with what I was using before. I was using a more traditional, independent center. My goal was to switch them out once a week, but in reality, it was often once every other week, sometimes once a month. So that meant I was doing a huge prep session, but my students were seeing the same resources over and over again. With task boxes, they were doing these short, concise tasks, and that was really where the magic was. Because my students were doing such short tasks, say 10 task cards at a time, they were experiencing success quickly. They were having a quick win. Their attention was maintained, or is it sustained? But they were really into it. And then as soon as you could see, okay, attention might die off on card number 11 or 12, it's time to switch. That task is over. Let's grab a new one. Centers weren't like that for us. They could be really fun and engaging, but I found that when my students were visiting centers over and over again, over a couple of weeks span, they were more like pushing the cards around rather than engaged in a quick task. Their attention was not maintained. Does that sound familiar? All right. But I do understand that the sheer overwhelm of the number of tasks can feel like a stopper in getting started with them. I will mention that I do have a growing library of task boxes, task box printables. It's the Task Box Dollar Club. It's a monthly membership. It's $7. And when you join, you get instant access to this huge library. Plus you get new tasks each and every month. Okay, I can see how that could be overwhelming. However, they are very low prep. And because they are these short, concise tasks, you can pick and choose and find exactly what your students need. With centers, it was usually one theme, one topic, one skill that my students needed, but weren't very specific. All right, one last thing before I get into these quick tips you can start using today. Whenever I say task box, feel free to substitute if you're using another type of system in your classroom. If you are using file folders, adapted binders, bins, bags, every time I say task box, go ahead and substitute it. The tips will still work for you. All right, so let's get started. I have some quick tips. They are about how to choose the right tasks for your students. I'm going to go in order, which means if you have exactly 1 minute, do the first tip. If you have 2 minutes, go to the first and second tip, and so on. I'm going to go in order so that you can just continue to build as you make that switch over to task boxes. All right, ready to get started? Tip number 1, and if this is the only one you use, no worries, it will still be highly effective. Look at your students' IEP goals and objectives. Review their specific learning needs, their goals, their accommodations, and choose individual task boxes that directly align So this is tailoring instruction. So if you're looking at the TaskBox Dollar Club library, you can look at the entire catalog and just pick and choose. And you're doing this for individual students. Of course, there may be some overlap with students that you have grouped together because they have similar objectives. But you are going to first start just choosing those tasks that are going to be aligned. All right, step number 2. Tip number 2 is to look for task boxes that offer multiple levels of difficulty. So they may be the same task, but different varying skill levels. For example, if students are using some phonics activities, and maybe it's a read and match, and one student is interacting with CVC words, one student is interacting with words with initial and final blends, and another student is using the same task but using vowel teams. They're using the same task, but they're interacting with it at a level that's meeting their needs. Another idea is to use the exact same task box, but adapting it so that your students are getting what they need at their independent level. So, for example, if I had a math task, let's say I prep it 3 times. One student is interacting with that math task card using manipulatives. Another student is interacting exactly as is. Maybe it's clip cards and you've added some type of clip or clothespin. Maybe you can adjust the response based on students' interest or independent level. Maybe they are using eye gaze to show their response, or they are using a manipulative to cover up the answer. And then the third way is you could add an extension. You're adding a dry erase marker. Students can circle their answer and maybe then explain their thinking on the back of the task cards. Maybe they're adding another number sentence or whatever's appropriate. But if you can use these task boxes to meet multi-levels of difficulty, that can definitely reduce the overwhelm while still giving your students exactly what they need. Notice that steps 1 and 2 can absolutely overlap. You could choose tasks that align with your students' goals and objectives, but you also can make them multi-level so you're using the same task in more than one way. So easy, right? All right, here's tip number 3. Mix and match the tasks. So you've already prepped some task cards. You've prepped task cards that match students' IEP goals and objectives. You have chosen cards that have multi-levels of difficulty. Now, let's see how we can mix and match the different cards we have prepped to create brand new tasks. So let's go back to that example of read and match. I have these phonics task cards in the TaskBox Dollar Club library. So students are going to read a simple sentence that has high frequency words and CVC words. Then they are going to look at 2 picture answer choices. So they read the sentence and match the picture based on what they read. We have them at CVC, we have them at CVCE, we have them at higher levels. After students have used them as intended, you can also use those exact same task cards and turn them into a phonemic awareness sort. So students are sorting the cards between long and short vowels. If you have math tasks, maybe they're counting cards. Students are counting and then matching the numeral. Well, you could use those exact same cards for comparing. There are so many different ways you can use the exact same task boxes, and that will give you life in that task box. So one task you've prepped, you can use it several different ways. All right, ready for the next one. Tip number 4 is to use task boxes for review. Remember that task boxes are at a student's independent skill level, not grade level. This is where they can be independent. So once you have created a task box aligned with students' IEPs, so on, they're not forgotten. You can spiral them back in. You can mix and match them to create brand new tasks. They're not one and done. These are great review tools. So you're choosing them at students' independent levels. They're reviewing previously learned concepts, and you can create these independent work tasks that can be relevant across subject areas. So as we used our task boxes, sometimes I would take them to our small group just to use them as a quick warm-up or a quick progress monitoring, a quick check for understanding. Then I would move them over into my students' independent work systems. They would use these. This is perfect. I've aligned to this. Everything's great. but I wouldn't get rid of them after that. I would keep them in our task box library. So remember when I talked about my students doing 3 tasks? Well, they're pulling 3 task boxes, and maybe one I have pulled for them because that's exactly what they need. It's aligned. Maybe a second one is another skill that we did last week and we want to spiral it back in. Maybe the third is student choice. They can always pull. It's an evergreen library of tasks that they can continue to review because we're building our independence. The last tip is to focus on your students' independence. So please don't worry if tasks feel like they are playtime. They're so much fun. They're too easy. The purpose of using task boxes is to help our students task completion and to do that as independently as possible. So we're selecting tasks that are at students' independent level. We're saving those instructional tasks for our small groups. I think this is one of the biggest differences with centers. Because I was prepping huge centers, I was meeting Was I meeting my students' needs? That's to be determined. Maybe it was right on their instructional level. Maybe for some students it was independent. Maybe for some students it was way above. So with task boxes, if you do feel like there's a task that you have prepped, your student really wants to do it, maybe it's a high interest area, but you feel it's too high, you can always add hands-on materials. You could turn it into a visual discrimination task. Another idea is to use errorless learning tasks in independent workstations because our goal is to promote student independence and have them experience success. I hope these tips were exactly what you needed to get started and dip your toes in. I'm going to leave a link to the show notes that has more details for you about getting started, choosing the right task boxes for your students. There's also a link to the Taskbox Dollar Club so you can check it out for yourself. Let me know if you have any questions, and I'll see you in the next episode of the Special Educators Resource Room. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I'm dying to ask, what'd you think? Be sure to hit the follow or subscribe buttons so that you never miss an episode. You can find the show notes and links for everything mentioned in this episode at positivelylearningblog.com. See you next week for more special education solutions.